Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural Black Cultural Archives Town Hall in conversation with the BCA Managing Director, Arike Oke. I want to thank you in advance for your engagement, your voice, and your ideas. I also want to acknowledge the Black Cultural Archives Board and Chair of the Board, Dawn Hill, who are in attendance this evening. My name is Sabrina Clarke-Okwubanego. I am the co-founder of Niche on Demand, a production company where Black creativity, capital, and culture meet. I have the distinct honor of being your host this evening. This is a rare opportunity to be part of a conversation that will help shape Black British history. Tonight, we start our discussion that will continue for the next 10 years as we reimagine the Black Cultural Archives and understand more about the 2030 strategy. And so with that, I want to bring your attention to the agenda that we'll have this evening. This conversation is in two parts. The first part will be in conversation with Arike, and that will last for about 15 minutes. The second part will be a Q&A where you have opportunity to engage and ask questions. I want you to be aware that we are accessible this evening. We have our interpreter, Audrey Simmons, who you can see on your screen. We are also having closed caption by Ola Pearson from Clear Text. So a few logistics for this evening. Firstly, can I please ask you to turn your video on? You will notice that you have been muted upon entry, and that is because right now we have 158 participants, but we are expecting about 500 people. So we want to make sure that we are managing the broadband or any technical issues. So please turn your video on, but you will be muted throughout the entire town hall. But that does not mean that we don't want to engage with you. We want to hear your views, as you can see there. And there's three ways to do that this evening. The first way is to ask questions during the Q&A. And to facilitate that process, we are using a tool called Slido. You would have received in your invitation a link to slido.com, or you can join slido.com now by going to slido.com, either on your phone or in your PC. And in that, put in the code D829, hashtag D829. And what that does is gives you the opportunity to engage with us, entering code D829, as I said earlier. We are also using the hashtag BCA 2030. And so for people who are on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram, wherever you are, please use hashtag 2030. We specifically have Rhoda Boateng, who will be managing the Twitter conversation tonight. So don't forget to hashtag. But let's get back to Slido. In Slido, there's ability to do two things. First of all, to ask conversations and share your ideas, and three things I should say: participate in a live. So we want to hear from you. I see a lot of people engaging in the chat already, which is fantastic, but please direct your questions to Slido, because in Slido, there is an ability to upvote answers, to look at polls, etc. We also want to hear ideas. We want to know what your thoughts are. So as we engage throughout the evening, let us know in Slido, and also let us know in the chat. And then finally, in the poll, so there are questions already set by the team. As you go to your mobile phone now or look on your PC, you will see the various questions being asked. Let us know what you think about the questions that are being asked. So for example, how would you like to see the BCA archive collections expand over the next 2 years is a question right now that you can answer. And so as we progress in the evening, and before I turn to the main discussion for tonight, I want to say two things. One, just remember to please be respectful when you are engaging in the chats. Karis Morris-Brown, a BCA volunteer, is moderating the chat conversation, but we want to make sure that they are constructive. And the second thing is we only have now 55 minutes left. We are not going to get through everything over the next 55 minutes, but a reminder that this is really about the start of a conversation that will last for the next 10 years. And with that, I would turn to the Director of Black Cultural Archives, Arike Oke. How are you doing this evening, Arike?
Hi everybody, thank you so much for joining us. I'm good this evening. I am a little bit nervous because normally I can see everybody when I do an event, and I think the human connection is so important. But I'm really excited to be sharing our 10-year plan with you. I know it's crazy to do a 10-year plan in the middle of a pandemic. However, this has been a long time coming.
Fantastic. And I think a lot of people are really interested in what the next 10 years of the Black Cultural Archives looks like. But to start with, let's learn a little bit about you. Who is Arike Oke in 3 words?
In 3 words, I would say persuasive and collaborative. And of course, if when you meet me in person, you will notice I'm very short.
Yes, that is true, having met you in person. But the first 2 words you attribute to yourself, persuasive and collaborative, sounds like attributes that really fare well in your role as Managing Director of the Black Cultural Archives. Why did you want to become Managing Director of the Black Cultural Archives?
This is a question that I get asked quite a bit, actually, and I think some of it kind of stems from me being slightly more unknown than maybe some of the other candidates. So I'm from Hull. My heritage is Nigerian. My dad's Nigerian Yoruba, and I actually lived in Nigeria when I was little. But growing up in Hull is a challenging environment. I'm sure anyone from a small town in England or anywhere that's not a black country will have a similar kind of growing up experience. And for me, growing up was a lot about navigating my own identity and understanding where I come from and how I fit in to this country, and being perhaps a slight outsider in so many different ways. And growing up, I had a strong interest in history and understanding how history can help us all build identity. So I've worked in Birmingham on the Connecting Histories project, and that in that project, which was seminal for archives, was one of the first times that I had heard of Black Cultural Archives. That was when BCA was fundraising for its building in 1 Windrush Square. We now have our iconic building in 1 Windrush Square, but back in those days, we were still fundraising for it. And I know my project that I was on as a trainee, as a positive action trainee, we did what we could in Birmingham for that. I went back to Hull. I jointly convened Hull's first Black History Month. When I was an archivist in London, I gave some advice to the Black Dance Archives project that BCA was part of, and also helped BCA, the archivist then at BCA, in thinking about how to move the archive. So I've been kind of working behind the scenes for quite some time, and perhaps you can understand that from my background and my training and what I think about when I think about the importance of history, being the Managing Director of BCA is an ideal dream job, and something where once asked, once the call out was given, we need a new Director of BCA, like how could I ever pass up that opportunity to contribute what I can to the survival, but also the future thriving of this incredible organization. So
that's really great. You're actually the opportunity to actually work our dream job. And so you're doing that now, which must be one very rewarding and also exciting in terms of the future. I'm sure you've seen a lot in your tenure as manager. What is the one thing you wish you know now, what you know now, you wish you would have known when you first started? So what do you wish you would have known when you first started, having now worked at the BCA in your tenure?
Okay, so I think a lot of people would expect an answer that's going to be slightly different, because I came into the job with my eyes completely open. I knew that BCA had reached a pinch point in its funding in 2018, and so I was joining at a time where BCA was actually in recovery and licking its wounds from having that funding pinch point, and there was a lot of talk and discussion in the wider community about whether BCA was going to be able to survive. So I came into that with my eyes open. Sorry, I live in Hackney, so you can hear like a lot of traffic outside. But the one thing that I wish I had known, oh my gosh, that there was going to be a pandemic. But maybe that's just such a giveaway, because I feel like every leader and every person in the world is probably wishing that they had known there was a pandemic coming. What I am really glad and really surprised to have found out is how strong BCA's community is, and it actually, often makes me feel. I'm quite an emotional person, so it actually makes me feel quite emotional and potentially tearful at the amount of support and goodwill that BCA has, despite all the ups and downs and the struggle that it's been to get to the point where we are. It's really continued to be this touchstone for so many people, and so many people are incredibly generous. And that is not something that I wish I'd known, but it's something that I am, continually surprised and delighted to know about. Thank you.
And it's great, because when you are surprised by community and support, that's the best thing, because it enables you to then push further and to achieve things that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do alone. And that actually brings me to how the Black Cultural Archives is actually structured. So how is the BCA actually structured?
So the current team, not counting the pandemic situation, that we have a board of trustees. Our board of trustees we refreshed last year, so we have a lot of new trustees. Some of them are participants, attendees to this meeting. They bring a lot of energy, a lot of expertise, and they're there for the governance of BCA. And where I sit with them is in the centre of protecting BCA's mission and making sure that BCA survives. And then the delivery of what we do, we have Caris, who's our workforce development manager. She's graduated from being the volunteer manager to really looking across what else we can do to support the workforce in the cultural industry. And there's Aisha, who's our learning and engagement manager, recently become a doctor. She's passed her PhD. We have Hannah Ishmael, who's our archivist. She's also just passed her PhD. She's on maternity leave at the moment, and so Rhoda, who's tweeting for us tonight, is our archives supervisor. Rhoda is an amazing artist, and she also started out as part of our front of house team before becoming our archive supervisor. So it's one thing that I'm really keen on, is nurturing talent and helping people grow as part of BCA. We also have Michael, who runs the building, and our front of house team and cafe team. So it sounds, maybe when I list it like that, it sounds like a lot of people, but you might notice that unlike a lot of other cultural organizations, there's one person that runs one person that runs all of learning, one person that runs all of volunteering. So a very, very lean team, very lean team. And at the moment with the pandemic, of course, the team is even more stretched.
And I want to come back to the pandemic. I just want to remind people who've just joined, we want to hear from you. I see the questions that are coming fast and furious, so please go to slido.com to ask any questions and upvote questions you want Arike to address. And also the hashtag BCA 2030, as well as the chat is available for you as well. And so you've mentioned the pandemic twice now in our conversation, and we are all experiencing various degrees of impact because of coronavirus. The Black community in particular is disproportionately affected by the coronavirus, the BAME community. So I want to first acknowledge, for those of you who are on the call who have lost someone, we stand with you in your loss at this time. I want to ask you, what has been the impact to the BCA team as a result of COVID-19?
Thank you. And also, I fully acknowledge and I'm so sad about everyone's losses, including the ones within the family of the BCA team and our donors and supporters. I feel like all of us have been affected by this. So there's the personal effect that it's had on the people of BCA, but it's also meant that we've had to close the doors temporarily to our building at 1 Windrush Square. And after essentially nearly 4 decades, 3 and a bit decades of campaigning to get a building, that's certainly a blow for us that we've had to close the doors at all. BCA's infrastructure, even though we're being very sort of zippy today with an interpreter, thank you so much, Audrey, and closed captioning and Zoom, you can see it's still a learning curve for us. We've not used these tools before, we're learning how to use them. BCA's own computer systems aren't geared up to work outside of a building, so I've had to fundraise in order to buy laptops for the team. Tonight I'm not on a BCA laptop because the BCA laptops can't handle Zoom. So, you know, it's been difficult because we had to, at first we were thinking it'll just be a couple of weeks, we can close for a couple of weeks, we'll open again. But in fact, you know, we had plans with a local artist to have an artist in residence program this summer. So all of our exhibition plans and our residency plans have fallen through because we lost the funding for our artist program. We're not sure. We'd only just opened an exhibition, so when we reopen the building, we can open that exhibition again and let it finish its run. But the exhibitions after that, some of them are people like the Sickle Cell Society, who were supposed to be creating their exhibition for us this summer to go in October. With the pandemic, they're not able to, you know, visit some of their participants because, of course, when you have sickle cell, you're very vulnerable. So we're not sure really what's going to happen programming-wise. I did get some good funding news today, though, so there will be something happening programming-wise. But in the building, we're not sure. And one of the reasons that sorry, I'll wrap up really quickly, but I wanted to just say one of the reasons that BCA exists is to be that space for communities to come together and show and celebrate our culture and our people. And so to not have the building is quite a disappointing experience for us.
And I think you're echoing some of the challenges a lot of small organizations are facing right now, both the issue with the personal impact and having to be a leader and being a leader in crisis. But you also mentioned a very critical thing about the Black Cultural Archives is the ability to be a community. And to have community, especially in challenging times. And so that brings us very nicely then into what the future may look like for the BCA. So before we start to talk about 2030, what were the founding principles of the Black Cultural Archives?
And I wanted to just recognize that Tunde Garrison is one of the participants. He's Len Garrison's son. And if you're not aware, Len Garrison was one of the most iconic founders of BCA. So BCA was originally created as a community, a very positive community response in the 1980s to the inequalities that were happening then and the effects that those inequalities had on our communities. So we're thinking of the New Cross fire, we're thinking of the uprisings in 1981, which, by the way, pandemic or no pandemic, we will be recognising the 1981 uprisings next year in their 40th anniversary. And things like the Coward book that came out that was called How the Black Child is Made Educationally Subnormal in the Education System. All of these things are so concerning to the collective that founded us. They really wanted to create something very positive that, again, is this community space that demonstrates that we were here before, that we're here now, that we're going to be here, and that we have role models, that we can be prideful in ourselves in a good way, pride in a good way, and that we have this immense wealth in our own communities, in our own selves, that we should be sharing and celebrating. And so the founding principles of BCA was a lot about positive representation, looking back to history. Our founding collection, collected by Len Garrison in the main parts, but also donated by others, created an archive museum. Over time, we became Bicultural Archives, but one of the things which we might talk about later is how to bring back a bit more of that museum, how to get those objects out so people can see them and learn from them. So very much about our histories and about our futures and about seeing ourselves through our own eyes and not through the lens of mainstream society or any of these challenges that are being thrown at us day by day.
And I want to pick up on that. So seeing ourselves through our own eyes and our future. What is the BCA's 2030 vision?
Okay, right, 2030 vision. So I did want to, recognize that obviously in the middle of a pandemic, is it crazy to have a 10-year vision? And I would say it's not at all. In fact, we need more of these visions for the future. And so I really want this tonight to be the starting point at which we build this together. As I mentioned, we got a new board last year, a new board of trustees. Some of the trustees stayed on, but we have a whole new injection of talent. I spent a lot of my first year at BCA, I'm just a year into the job now, listening to people, and also having conversations to the extent I kept losing my voice in those first few months. And so the vision comes out of that. In the next 10 years, we want to be resilient, entrepreneurial, flexible. We don't want to be in a position that we were in 2018 where we were worried about our survival. We want to be thriving. Also in 2030, we want to have an international workforce development program. So we're talking about not only having these apprentice level interventions that over and over occur in heritage, but also helping people throughout their careers to actually be running organizations. We want to have the collections available in person, touring, and online. The online bit we thought was going to come later. I guess we'll do it now. We also want to, so one of the founding things of BCA is it's an educational charity. And so a lot of what we had talked about in the past was about teaching Black history in schools. Actually, by 2030, we want the teaching and learning about Black history to be available to everyone.
Absolutely.
And so those are the main planks of our 2030 vision. And actually after this event, we will be sharing that in an easy to read document, so you don't have to try and remember what I've said.
That is great. Sounds like music to my ears. I'm excited. But what would you say to people who say, well, actually, that's quite ambitious. You want to do workforce development, you want to have Black history across the UK, you want to, be a museum, bring out archives, you want to engage in the community, you're still an educational charity. Whoa, BCA, slow down. What would you say to the critics that might say, that's ambitious? Can you actually achieve it?
Now it's 10 years. It's a 10-year strategy. What else could we be but ambitious? And if I tell you that when we began having strategy meetings, there was something like, I don't know, maybe 50 or 60 ambitions. So we've cut it down. And of course, everyone that's in the meeting, this meeting tonight, I'm sure you will have your own ideas of what BCA should be doing for 2030 that aren't among those ones I've listed. So while it is ambitious, it still doesn't encompass everything that people want for BCA. I see Sandra Shakespeare's one of the attendees here. Sandra is campaigning for a Black British Museum, and I absolutely think that BCA cannot be the only organisation. One of the reasons why we have a lot of other things that people want BCA to be doing is because we're the kind of flagship. We're the ones who have become this opportunity to move from grassroots to policy making, to have that seat at the policy table. But we don't want to be alone. We don't want to be alone. It's completely inappropriate for BCA to be the only organisation. And I realise as I'm getting emotional about this that I'm speeding up, so I'm going to slow down for Audrey, sorry. And sorry, I forgot actually on that note to mention one of the other 2030 objectives, which is to use our active voice. So something that we do now and want to do more of as we grow our capacity. Remember, the team is tiny at the moment, but what we need to do more of is using our voice, using our influence.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I wanted to come back to the theme of tonight, which is reimagining BCA. And I don't want to lose sight of, everything that went out in the collateral said reimagine, reimagine. What is the Reimagine project, so people know who may not be intimate with the BCA? What is Reimagine? Okay,
I'm really excited about it. Despite the pandemic, one of the big things that we, on our plan for this whole year for 2020, is the Reimagine project. It is the capital project, essentially a building project. I spent roughly the first 6 months of being in the job, securing money for BCA to carry on. And I managed to secure a very, well, not very, but a modest amount to help us make the space fulfill its potential. So our address is 1 Windrush Square. That's a very powerful address. Our mission includes being the home of Black British history. That's a very powerful mission. And that building speaks to, it's a grade 2 listed building, it's a Georgian building. It speaks to a legacy of us being in the past. There were plenty of Black Georgians, plenty of Georgians of African descent in London, and us being in that building is symbolic. We're not in a new building, we're in a building that speaks to our lengthy time. And so the money, the capital project money, is for us to reimagine that space into being what it can be. When we first received the funding, it was really looking at the income generating parts of the space for very obvious reasons. BCA needs to have an income in order to keep going. Now that the pandemic has happened, it gives us the opportunity to pause and think, well, if we're not going to be able to have as many people come in because we have to socially distance in the building, that changes a little bit whether we should focus on the income generating. What else can we focus on? And again, I had some good news about funding today that we can add to that pot, we can add to that capital pot.
So it seems like everything is, even though we are in the middle of a crisis, a lot of the foundation is coming together, looking at the physical space of the building, looking at what the virtual space needs to be, thinking strategically about what BCA will be over the next 10 years, which is quite exciting for the organization. And that brings us to a nice end to our conversation. And then we turn to the participants of the evening, because the next 30 minutes is about you and your questions. So I want to remind you of a couple of things. If you are in the chat and you have questions, please go to slido.com, because that's where we will be taking the Q&A from. Please have your discussions and comments, etc., in the chat, but questions will be pulled from slido.com. So please go there. Second thing, don't forget to hashtag BCA 2030 on Twitter. We want to hear your comments, hear your views for the evening. So I will turn to, and also before I forget, we are also polling. So I'll come back to polls in between questions that I'm getting from individuals. If you, I'm not going to refer to your name, I'm just going to ask the questions that I see, but if you want me to say your name, then please, please let me know. Well, your name's now on the screen. So if you don't want people to see your name, please answer it anonymously. So I'm going to start with Sandra first at the top, which her question was upvoted 18 times, and I'll just read through the question. The conversation for the formation of a Black British Museum following the Museum Association in 2019 conference is galvanizing voices through the BB Museum project, Black Brit Museum. Is the vision for BCA still rooted in that of an archive, or has this now shifted towards a museum? So can you clarify that point?
Yeah, of
in
course.
terms of the next
And
years?
of course. And Sandra is one of the people who's been really, really active in making sure Black history is represented in the archive world as well. It's not shifted. We were set up. It's been in our constitution since the 1990s to have a museum space. It's shifted over time to become more of an archive, and I wasn't there when that happened, but I imagine that's because it's easier to have an archive when you don't have a building than it is to have a museum when you don't have a building. We opened One Windrush Square in 2014, and by that point we were very rooted in the name Black Cultural Archives. Our legal name is African People's Historical Monument Foundation, which is quite a long name, but a very important name. So we have museum objects. Our object collection in no way is as complete. Our archive collection isn't complete. Our object collection is nowhere near as complete as our archive collection. So the Black British Museum, that is something separate that will have a very, very specific collecting, collecting policy, collecting aim, and it'll have a very specific narrative aim. Okay. When we're talking about our museum objects, we're talking about getting them out of storage so people can see them. We're not talking about replicating the Black British Museum. So you can see in our 10-year vision, our direction of travel, that the museum part is not the overriding part. However, sharing our collections is definitely the motivation for that. So it doesn't clash, it's complementary.
And ask a very basic question for people who may not know the difference. What is the difference, just in short words, between an archive and a museum? I think it's very important to make that.
There's quite a big philosophical difference. And the other thing that I write like archive theory articles for archive journals and speak at archive conferences about archival theory. So I'm not going to go too much into archival theory, but back of a post-it, archives are documents, museums are objects. There's a lot more to it.
But that I think that clarifies it. Next question from Kulvinder Rayat. From my experience, many families hold very relevant information that would be helpful to grow the BCA archive material. How can you encourage families and individuals to donate more material to help learn more about the experiences of early Black UK residents and the impact they had on UK industry?
That's a really exciting question, especially the last bit, the impact. This is something that I'm personally very interested in, is the impact. So one of the things about heritage organizations is, why are we there if we're not having an impact? What is our social purpose if we're not having an impact? Yes, very many people do hold really relevant collections for us. We do actively collect, and you can email archives@bcaheritage.org.uk if you have a collection that you would like to start talking to us about. It's quite a long conversation, because we like to be quite ethical about it. So we would talk about access and do sensitivity checks and things like that. At the moment, I'm not sure how that's going to work in the pandemic era, because it's very face-to-face, but I'm sure we'll figure it out. An action for us in the immediate term is to be a lot better at how we talk to people, especially online. So with our website, I'm sure there could be a lot more that we do on the website to help people understand how to donate their collections to us. And I'm just very quickly going to also note, again, that each archive around the country has its own collecting policy. And sometimes it might be appropriate to give a collection to your local archive so that people don't have to come to London to see it. So that's just a note for people around the country. And then what we would want to do then is make sure that that local archive catalogues it and publicises it, and then BCA can signpost towards it, and that might actually be a good way to do it. So it's a lot of conversations ongoing behind the scenes at BCA about that, but it's certainly on our list to be better at talking to people.
Fantastic. Next question. Audience comes from Sarah R. And the question there is, are there plans to have paid virtual events and workshops to engage people who don't live and get to London?
Okay. I love that Sarah R is thinking about our income. That's so nice. Yeah, I love it. Yes, there's definitely plans. As I kind of alluded to, but maybe glossed over before, one of the impacts of the current pandemic implications for us is that we don't have access to our building on a regular basis, and also we don't have very good computers. So I've been able to find some money for buying that kind of digital infrastructure. Mm-hmm. I've also today, so some of the team don't even know this yet, but today been able to secure some funding to help us with digital programming. Mm-hmm. Personally, I very much believe that artists and participants should be paid. If they want to donate their fee to BCA, that's brilliant, but I don't think that we should rely on people giving us free labour. So I'm very keen to get funding or sponsorship to be able to pay artists and creatives and makers. So that's a long answer. The short answer is yes, we are definitely working on some digital programming. It takes us a while to get the momentum up because of the pandemic.
And I think the key thing there, one of the most important things, is being able to pay creatives and being for people to also have income, even though you yourself as an organization relies on receiving income and donorship and support. So that reciprocity, I think, in the community is very much appreciated. I'm going to go to one more question before I shift slightly to the poll, just to see some of the responses that we are getting. A reminder, slido.com for your questions, Q&A, comments in the chat, and don't forget to hashtag BCA 2030. Kovinder seems to be very popular, so his questions next was upvoted. What are your plans to take the archive online, make it digital, so more audiences can access the information you hold?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that one, and also Anonymous's question a bit further down about early career researchers. What are our plans to take the archive online, make it digital? There are plans in progress. Before the pandemic, we'd actually had this amazing full-day hackathon with Lloyds Bank, where they had really generously sent their software developers, their copyright specialists, to spend a day at BCA and help us to make a roadmap to take the archive online. Mm-hmm. And last year we had finished a project with Google Arts and Culture to make a series of online exhibitions mm-hmm. with the archive. Everyone's gone a little bit quiet because of the pandemic, I suppose. It's something that we need help with, basically. We haven't got the team capacity to do it. We haven't got the computer infrastructure to do it. It's something that we want to do and something that we've been working towards. So that kind of feeds into the question about early career researchers, because one of the things that's really concerning to us at the moment is that without access to our collections, research is not happening. We know that people use our collections for their dissertations. We know they use them for their TV programs. They use them for their books. At the moment, because the building's closed and because of the pandemic, it's really difficult for us to give access to our collections. We have a meeting tomorrow evening with our advisory group for the archive, It's one of the questions that we're going to ask them for some help just thinking around, like how can we make our collections available, especially for research when the building is less accessible. And it's something that we have a funding bid in with a trust at the moment. For next year, all being well, we will be doing a lot of work around our mental health archive collections. Again, incredibly important and incredibly timely. So, yeah.
Fantastic. So let's switch to the poll. Let's see some responses on the polls so far and give you a room to catch your breath. Do you have any water, Arike? So if we go to the poll, the live poll, to see where we are at the moment, we have BCA 1 of 2. For some reason I can't see that fully on my screen, so I'll just switch to a different view. 35% of the individuals who polled on what do you think is the most important outcome for BCA in 2030, their thoughts were BCA making teaching and learning about Black history available to everyone. So 35% thought that, and immediately after that is the Black Cultural Archives being resilient, flexible, and entrepreneurial, which falls in line with the strategy and your approach. And then 23% of the people who've answered saying the Black Cultural Archives, natural collections of African and Caribbean descent people history are shared online, touring, and in person, which goes back to the question about making the archives more accessible, making it digital so people can view it whether they're in London or anywhere around the world. And I want to go to the back to the question that was on the page, the entrepreneurial point about the BCA. And the question was, thinking of being entrepreneurial and to ensure Black British issues and life stories are discussed and captured for the future, how can we collectively invest in Black-led arts and media? And that came from Elaine Carby.
Thank you. How can we collectively invest? I think that's a very key word, 2 words, collectively and invest. It goes into what we're asking from our wider community at BCA. Join us, collaborate with us, amplify our voice. That's exactly what this question is about in terms of Black-led arts and media. It's one of the founding principles of BCA to discuss capture for the future, but also to invest in the future. Yeah, I think the answer's in the question, how we should be collectively investing in it. Active ways to do that, to commission Black artists, to promote them, use your channels to promote them, tell people about them, but also pay them, buy their work, commission them if you're in a position to commission. So that's kind of promoting and investing, but also in terms of the media, we've had some really wonderful relationships with The Voice, but also Colourful Radio, also Dotun Adebayo's show, Brixton Blog, Galdem, Black Ballad. It's about coming together and using one voice. I'm very keen on one voice, actually, and being that way of not just focusing on what they say in French, the grand homme, the great men. It's about going from the emerging artists, the emerging makers, the grassroots, the people who have got no interest in selling 100,000 things. They might just want to influence their local street. It's going from them to also the Sonia Boyces, who will be first Black British woman to represent Britain at the Venice Biennale next year, if the Venice Biennale happens. It's about understanding we have an entire spectrum. We are incredibly diverse. We can have a label, Black, which is a great operational label. It's a great strategic and tactical label for us to use. But we have a lot of richness, a lot of diversity, and it's about recognizing all of that when we're talking about collectively investing in Black-led arts and media.
Thanks. And this next
Working
question.
together, working together.
Working together. And this next question actually speaks to to diversity, but how far is Black Cultural Archives going to go in that richness of diversity? And it came from an anonymous person.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have plans to link museums and the archives in Africa and the Caribbean to foster transatlantic cultural connection?
I have a desire to do that. Whether we've made a plan about how we're going to do that is another question. But we have a desire to do that, and hopefully that's reflected in our 10-year vision. And this evening is about getting people together to really start a conversation that we'll keep having about how to do it. At the moment, I haven't got a roadmap, a plan about how we're going to do that. But I think some of you here can help with that. Yeah. And also just to note as well that last summer I got some funding, big believer in getting other people to pay for BCA's work. I got some funding to visit some of our friends in New York. I went to Weeksville Heritage Center. If you're not aware of Weeksville, you should definitely Google them, they're amazing. The Bronx Museum, I went to Studio Museum Harlem, I went to CCC ADI, the Caribbean Cultural Center and African Diaspora Institute. And so we started to make those links with our cousins in America. And I would very much, yeah, it's a desire at the moment, and I'm gonna figure it out, but I'll need help to figure it out.
Fantastic, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who want to help. The next two questions actually focuses on young people, and so one is from Isabel Jones, and the second is anonymous. So I'll take the first one first from Isabel Jones. I'm an archives and records management student doing my dissertation on the importance of integrating Black history into mainstream education. How do you think we should engage with our young people and help them to access Black history?
Okay, so this is a great question because I really wanted to make sure that I mentioned some of the associate collectives and charities that work with BCA. So we have some residents at BCA. We have Community, which is an independent charity, and they work with young people. They are young people. They work with their peers on spoken word events. So every Wednesday night when our building is open, there's this poetic unity night. We also have Decolonize the Archive in residence, and they work with young people to use the archive to create podcasts, theatre pieces. We also have Young Historians Project, who are incredibly important. They've been doing work for quite a few years now. They, again, are young people who are demystifying the world of becoming a professional historian, and their current project is about African women in the NHS. If you just Google Young Historians Project, you'll find them. They're brilliant. And then we also have our latest resident is Of the People Collective, which is concerned with hip-hop, primarily, many other things. So yeah, so that's one of the ways we work in partnership with other organisations and collectives who are there on the ground with young people. In the past, BCA has had a youth forum. Probably, I don't know really, it was before my time, the youth forum. I think someone told me they grew up and stopped being young, so I don't know. But it's one of the things that Aisha, our learning manager, wants to revive is the youth forum as well. And I know that question was broader than what's BCA doing, but I think that is like a little bit instructive in what other people are doing as well, and some of the very exciting work that's actually already happening. And this is something that I think we all need to kind of be aware of in terms of like amplifying what work is already happening and making sure that work has as wide a reach as possible.
Fantastic, and still keeping in the theme of young people, there was a question here from Cheryl Bowen. How will young people aged 14 to 21 years be involved in the process as they're now leaders and in the future? And by process, I'm not sure if you're referring to the strategy process, Cheryl, so I'll be specific and say for the next 10 years, so the BCA 2030 vision, how can 14 to 20-year-olds be involved and engaged in that process?
Mm-hmm. Basically, as it's what I've been saying in terms of, like, if we can revivify the youth forum, then they would be active, and working with people that are resident at BCA and having more programs for young people to get involved. We are open, we are listening to young people, but it's also, young people are working and operating in slightly different modes, and as you can gather, BCA has not been completely tech friendly until now.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to be better at being tech friendly, but the question is, how will young people be involved? And so I would hope that young people will want to be involved, and that we'll be able, and when we invite young people to be involved, that they will get involved. But to make sure, we'll work with people like Decolonise the Archive and Poetic Unity who actually are young and can get more young people involved.
Fantastic. I'm just going to scroll down to some questions that I see highlighted. And one of the questions came from an anonymous person. So, do BCA actively look at purchasing or accepting original material to add to their archives for persons to view, which reflects particularly early Black British lives? This person finds it lacking.
Okay, there's plenty of areas in our collections which are lacking. We have not got very many collections around the disabled Black experience. We do not have very many collections around the queer Black experience, LGBTQ history. We don't really have very many collections around Spanish-speaking Black people. So there's a lot of work to do in our gaps. There's a lot. We don't have an acquisition budget. When we are more wealthy, we will. We have been able to purchase things in the past if we're quick enough to raise the money to buy specific things. Original works, our collecting priority is still archive material, which sometimes contains original works, but because we only have a limited amount of space for three-dimensional things, objects, we don't actively collect objects at the moment. We have objects, but we don't actively collect them purely for logistical reasons.
Thank you. I think you touched on this question, this answer earlier, but I just want to be very specific and ask it directly if it wasn't caught. Do you, the BCA, support early career researchers and historians to do talks about their work on Black British history? And this was anonymous.
Okay, so I addressed it a little bit earlier in talking about my concern about access to the collections for researchers. Ways that we've supported early career researchers in the past. Sometimes when people say support, they mean fund. We don't fund them because we don't have that kind of structure to have the money to fund people, but we work in partnership. So at the moment, we have a partnership with the University of Roehampton, where one of their doctoral students will be in residence at BCA from the next academic year. We have a collaboration with King's College, where one of their lecturers will be in residence at BCA, making things more available, especially for early career researchers. And she actually came to King's College from the Runnymede Trust, which is a wonderful race equality charity, one of the leading race equality think tanks. We also have, when early career researchers or researchers have come to us with their research and wanted to have a seminar or an event at BCA, we've been able to make that happen. So it's a conversation. What support we give tends to be quite bespoke support based on a conversation. It's not something that we've had while I've been there. I think it's possibly been different before in my predecessors' times. But while I've been there, it's not something that we've had the opportunity to be really proactive about.
And last question from the QA. Can you imagine we're almost to time? The last question from Anonymous before we move on, just to summarize the evening. How will the Black Cultural Archives stand out from similar institutions such as Autograph in Shoreditch, where archive research, exhibitions, and learning are integrated well with the public and funding opportunities to showcase research and arts? How is the BCA going to stand out?
Well, we stand with them. Autograph's one of my favourite spaces for contemporary art in London. We have been able to have contemporary artists at BCA, including last year's Stephen Rudder. If Stephen's on this meeting, I'll definitely reply to your email very soon. Stephen Rudder made a contemporary art installation in our gallery last year about Black men's mental health, which was incredibly exciting to me. I think it's probably one of the best things that we've done in supporting contemporary art. So Autograph is a lot about photography and contemporary work. They've got a great connection with Vanley Burke, who was one of my first jobs was cataloguing Vanley's collection. So Autograph have a big place in my heart, but we stand with them. We don't, you know, the things that are in our 2030 strategy that's on the screen now, those are not part of Autograph's mission. Autograph has a very different mission. The Africa Centre has a very different mission. The Bernie Grant Arts Centre has a very different mission. We stand with them. We're part of the ecology, we're part of the family, and as a wider body, we'll change the world, but we're not in competition with them.
That is a great place to end in terms of the Q&A on Slido, standing with organizations, because the theme of tonight has been about community, has been about collaboration. So standing with organizations to move the vision forward is very, very, very important. I also wanted to go back to the poll on the strategy that you mentioned, and it turns out still to be in the lead. What do you think is the most important outcome for the Black Cultural Archives in 2030? And that is the BCA teaching and learning about Black history and making that available to everyone. Followed tie between the BCA becoming resilient, flexible, and entrepreneurial, and also the BCA's national collections of African and Caribbean descent people's history are shared online, touring, and in person. And so we are almost just at the end of the evening, just a couple of things to do. We want to honor your time and end at 8 o'clock, but there are a couple of important things that we must do before we close for the evening. There are 3 calls to action for you tonight as participants. If it didn't come out as a theme, I want to clarify. The Black Culture Archives need your time, need your network, need your money. And so if you are wanting to support in any of those 3 ways, go to the Black Culture Archives website, put in your information, register your interest, because that vision comes to pass with all of us coming together. The second thing to do is to thank you for participating for tonight. The conversations have been fast and furious, both in the chat and in Slido. Slido will be up and open until 10 o'clock tonight. So keep on getting your questions in. We will answer that in terms of FAQs document, which will be posted on the Black Cultural Archives site. So it will be posted. There will be also a strategy document sent to you as part of this conversation that you can read and get more information. I am asking you to please manage your expectations and not inundate Arike and the team tomorrow with 500 emails, because as she said, they are a small team, but they will answer your questions and come back to you as soon as possible. I also want to thank the team that made it possible this evening. So thank you to the participants. I want to thank Audrey Simmons, who you see, who has been our interpreter this evening, Ola Pearson, who is doing captioning, and then the team behind the scenes, Karis Morris-Brown, Rhoda Boateng, and Zena Twit. And also want to acknowledge the National Lottery Fund for their financial support in terms of making this evening come to life. We're also asking you to complete a feedback about what you thought about this evening on Slido. So please go ahead and let us know from 1 to 5 what you thought about this evening. And with that, I want to hand over to you, Arike, because my hosting duties are done, and give it to you for closing comments.
Thank you so much. So I want to make sure that you, Sabrina, are thanked, and Zena as well. So Niche on Demand have essentially made this one of the best organised BCA events of all time. So thank you so much, both of you, for making that possible. And I just wanted to repeat Sabrina's notes that the calls to action: join, collaborate, promote. These are individual and network and community actions. It's not about being alone. It's not about BCA being alone. It's not all about us being alone in our homes. It's about human connection. And on that note, as you can see, the new mural for Thai has come up. And I wanted to acknowledge that members of the BCA family, as members of all of our families, have been affected by the pandemic that we're currently going through. I think that photograph was taken by Paul Pablo Reed, who was my immediate predecessor at BCA. And I just wanted to share that, and also the next image as well of Dame Jocelyn Anita Barrow. Both Thai and Dame Jocelyn are incredibly important to BCA's journey. They're just two representatives of so many people who have made BCA get to where we are now and get to where we're going. And I wanted to take that moment to recognise them and to, of course, thank you all for coming. And I have been trying to keep an eye on the chat as it's been going up, and I really see a lot of great debate and conversation in the chat. So I look forward to sharing this recording with you after the event, and also the FAQs. I think we'll try and collate similar questions from the Slido, and probably from the chat as well if it doesn't make it onto the Slido, and publish those on our website later. And of course we'll do this kind of event again. I'm not sure when exactly. That's something for us to discuss in our debrief. But we'll certainly, this is the beginning of a conversation. So I just want to give thanks to all of you for being part of our family. And have a good evening.
Have a good evening, everyone. Be safe, stay healthy.